think are important, but didn't really fit well into the presentation. I'm a big fan of not missing lifts in training. I think it builds good habits. Missed lifts I don't think provide anything positive. They can be detrimental to confidence. So I think like practicing for success, hitting a lot of successful attempts, but making them fast, making them smooth, I think that does a lot, again, to build up confidence and just to like prepare you to do the same thing when it counts in a competition. If you like miss lifts all the time in training and you go to competition and miss lifts, it's just like another day. That's what happens. But if you like do nothing but hit lifts, hit lifts, hit lifts, when you get to a competition, you're in that mindset like I hit lifts. That's what I do. So when you get a weight on your back, it's like you're not worried about missing because you don't miss. So that's not to say you'll never miss, but it's just something to like endeavor to do is always try and be in your training successful with attempts. There's a quote that I really like by the guy Benedict Magnusson, is the world record holder in the deadlift. He said, he's like, when it comes to training, it's better not to know how strong you are than to know exactly how weak you are. It's better to have like something in the tank than it is to know exactly how much you can miss. Kind of coming along that, I think that like the ability to grind, especially with like newer lifters, is a useful skill. So when you get that like real heavy weight and it like stops you, when people are like, anyways, some lifters you'll see will kind of like, they'll be like going up in a squat, down, up, and then they just stop. And they come back down, they finish. And some lifters are able to stick with that and work their way through it, grind through it. And I think that is a skill you can learn. And there's something I like to think of as like Charlie Francis said in sprinting, there's a time warp that happens with sprinters. So they're running and like a 100-meter dash takes under 10 seconds for these guys. But it feels like it takes so much longer when you're in it. You probably have experienced that with a really heavy lift where like maybe you videoed or something like that and it feels like it's like 10 seconds long, but it was really like, that's it. So it's important to like practice that so you're prepared for that like time warp effect. So even when the lift seems to slow down and stop completely, you're able to keep lifting through that, keep moving the weight and like handle it. And so I think the best way to do that is with weights that are like heavy but not real maxes. So they'll slow you down and you'll focus on like grinding through that, but not so heavy you're actually gonna miss them. So like in terms of difficulty being like 9 out of 10. Other thing I think is kind of cool is this idea of like accumulation of marginal gains. So this is from an article I read about Big Sky, which is the British cycling team. And they had a new head coach who took over, and his goal was to get a British Tour de France winner, which has never happened. And so the big thing that he focused on was what he called the accumulation of marginal gains. It was the idea of like, instead of making any big drastic changes, it was doing everything like 1% better. So it was like, they would do things like test which pillows the athletes got the best sleep on, and then they pack them and bring them to hotels. So they slept a little better. They would like learn the best way to like wash their hands so they wouldn't get infections, they get sick less often so they could train better. And that's like pretty dramatic, but like little things like, you know, I think it implies just little things in terms of like, can I do a little bit better with the nutrition or a little bit better with sleep, or like what little things can I make 1% better? And what they ended up doing is in 3 years, they produced the first Tour de France winner from Britain. I think they went on to do 3 consecutive ones. And it's this idea that like the sum is bigger than the parts. So little improvements here and there in terms of like, what can I do to be a little bit more efficient with my training, a little bit more efficient with my recovery, a little bit more efficient with my like fatigue management, what can I do, like little recovery things or like stuff like that, I think go a long way long term, producing like really impressive final results. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think the last thing, and something I think is really important, is don't get hurt. That sounds like pretty stupid to say that, but the biggest thing I see happening with lifters is it's like, there's a mindset, and I understand it, that like, you know, like go hard or go home, or like beast mode, that kind of stuff. It's like really sexy to say, and like kind of cool, like, oh, I'm so hardcore, I'm gonna crush it, like, I don't feel good today, but like, fuck it, I'm going anyways. And like, the thing is, like, no matter how hard you work or how good a training session you have, like, the net result from that is pretty minimal. So if I think about like, no matter how, like, is there any one training session that's worth an injury? And the answer is like, no, it's never worth an injury. And so basically, if I think about like, if I push like a red line all the time, I go as hard as I possibly can, eventually I'm gonna step over and hurt myself. Yeah, eventually, there's no way to toe that line indefinitely before you step over the edge. If you can bring it back just a little bit, if I work at like 85 or 90% of like max ability, that's still pretty good. I still get like a pretty decent result from that. Maybe it's not quite as good as being at 100, but if I can do that like 90% for 10 years, I'll be way ahead of anybody who does 100% for 1 year and then hurts themselves. I don't care who you are. And one of the guys I learned a lot from was a bench presser named Clint Harwood. He's in his 40s now. He's a multiply bench presser, but he benched 860, which is one of the heaviest benches of all time. And he was on top of the bench press game for close to 20 years. And when I met him, I was like pretty surprised because he was like one of the laziest lifters I ever met. I don't mean that in a negative way, but like he was the kind of guy who would go into a training session, be like, nah, things don't feel good today. I think I'm gonna like shut it down right there. And I was like, what are you doing? What are you like? Oh, bitch out! You can go harder. And he was like, yeah, but like, what's it worth? Well, is it worth getting hurt? And he's like, he told me a story. He got hurt one time. He had a tricep tear because he was training at another guy's gym and he was doing some skull crushers. They didn't feel good. He said, screw it, he's going to push through it anyways, and ended up tearing his tricep. It took him 6 months to rehab. And he said, after that I learned, like, no matter how good of an effect I could have gotten from that one set of triceps, it wasn't worth 6 months of bench training. So I think that's something important to keep in mind, especially as you get into this and get better. It gets really easy to think about like going hard all the time, but sometimes you need to back it off and like a little bit of discretion is the better part of valor here. And like, sometimes you got to know when to call it in terms of training. And if you can keep that in mind, like I said, long term, I think you'll be way ahead of anybody who trains balls to the wall all the time. Because eventually, like I said, you can only be on that edge so long before you eventually step over and have to face the consequences.